Hello once again, this is lecture 24 in our series of Gematria. We are going to have a little short lecture today on this unfortunate suicide of Caroline Flack. I did a little bit of research. I wrote a book a few years back where I take a little bit morbid, hence the front cover, Your Days Are Numbered, where I take I haven't actually counted them, probably around about 200 different events. Most of them are to do with, unfortunately, to death, but some are not, where I show the link between the event and the date in which it occurs. For example, 35 die when Comet airliner falls into Mediterranean. If I use the placement value, I get 587. And January the 10th, 1944, which is the date at which it occurred, is also 587. Jim Reeves dies aged 40 as his private plane crashes in Woodland. That's 658. 31st of July, 1954, that's 658. So I show the link using the placement value, I think almost entirely using the placement values for these particular links. I do use other systems to show interrelationships. And this shows that events that take place are not by chance. They are actually mapped out in some sort of amazing matrix within the English language, and also in Hebrew as well, because the one event, which was the 6-Day War I was looking at in Israel, that I had to use Hebrew. Somewhat similar to what happened when I was associating scientists with what they invented, and that's in this book, which has recently come out. It's called Beyond Science. It's a big book. This book goes through over 200 scientists and connects them to the invention or the book that they wrote or the discovery that they made using Gematria. And again, I've got two Israeli scientists which I couldn't find a Gematria connection using English, but I could with Hebrew because they live in Israel. So it's called a multi-linguistic sort of a map that exists for all of history. And it doesn't just go with dates of people's deaths and events, and it goes with many, many things. Here is another recent book of mine. I've got 4 recent books out now. This is called The White Book of White. And The White Book of White is about things that are white. So I connect the polar bear to the colour white, the Arctic wolf white to white, the dove to the colour white, all using both Hebrew and English Gematria, excuse me, still got this cough. Why the white butterfly, why the white fly is white. So I show this one, I use the technical term, it's called an alirodi, I can't pronounce it, did I? The alirodi is, that word is connected to white, the word white. This book actually started off when I was looking at salt. I haven't actually finished the book on salt. I was writing a book on salt, and I took the word sodium chloride, and I use all the systems. I try what system that works, but the one that worked was the normal value, where S is 100, O is 60. D is 4, this is going up in 10. You go up to J, A is 1, to J is 10, K is 20, and then you get to S, which is 100, T is 200, U is 300, and you go all the way along there and add them all together, you get 722. And the word white, also using the same system, which is the normal values, decimal system, that also equals 722. And that's the Gematria that started me on saying, well, if I can do that for salt, which is sodium chloride, maybe I can do it for others. And it's a thin book. This is all these books are on my website now, and I go through starting off with animals. No, don't go the other way around. I start off with minerals. I go on to plants, and then I go on to animals, and then I go on to humans. And I do things that come from living things, like eggshell, bone, teeth, things like that, and I connect them all to white. So that's that book. So I'll talk about the other two after I've spoken about Caroline. So just two very straightforward gematria here. My sheet, let me just get it. This is my research sheet. Here it is. Einstein's table. No, piece of paper. There we are. I write her name at the top, Caroline Louise Flack. I insist on using the full name when I find out the person's death, and also birth, which is complicated. Doing births is a bit more difficult because you don't always know their middle name, or if they have one. So I've got here Caroline, and I put down the dates. And there are different ways of making the date. You can say, for example, now she died on the 15th of February. So I could say, and you can do this yourself. It's this is no rocket science. This is something which I'm teaching you. You won't have a go. Try and do it and see, prove it yourself. It works. So I would start off the date, February. I should write it in short, but really need the full word, of course. February the 15th, and again you need the word, right? You need the full word, 15th in English. And February is 96. The is 3, and 15th is 95. If I then include the date, there's two ways of saying the date. So you can say that as 2020, or you can say it as 2020. Okay? So again, I'll do both. I'll say 2020. 20 is 107, and 20 is 107. So that will give me 214. So I've got February the 15th, 2020, and I would add all those up, and that will give me a value. I could say 15th of February, and that would be then 95. I've got these numbers right. 95 plus 21 is of, and 96. Of course, that will give me a different value, and then I could then use 2020 or 2020, and I'll get, so I've got here two values. I've got here, if I said February the 15th, 2020, or February the 15th, 2020, that will give me two values. Let me just write that in a different colour so you know how many different values we're talking about here. Two values. Now I can say 15th of February 2020 or 15th of February 2020. That will give me another two values. Or I can add the word the. You can't put the word the there. You won't say the February the 15th, but you would say the 15th of February. All right. So I could add the word the there, and I'll get another two values because I'll get the two ways of saying the year. So I'll get another two values. So far I've got 6 values. There's another way of writing the date. I could write 15 2nd 2020. The Americans would write it the other way. It doesn't really matter, right? And the word 15 is 65. The word 2 is 58. Sorry, and 2020 is 214. Or 214 is 220. Sorry, 2020 is actually 286. Right? So 2020 is 286. 2020 is 214. So I will get another 2 values. So altogether, I would have 8 values for a date, any specific date. Right? If I miss out the year, I will then just have another 3 values on top of that. But all the almost, in fact, I think there was only just one. I think the Guy Fawkes night, which he calls November the 5th. So I don't put the year in it because it's a particular night that occurs every single year. So, but in the case of finding the actual connection between an event and its date, I use the year as well, and that gives me 8 values. And you say, well, if I've got 8 values, aren't I bound to find a connection? The answer is no, because there's just thousands of numbers. Your range of values could be anything from from maybe 100 to, depending on the month, December is 55, depending on the month and the actual day. It will give you a range of values or possible values, which is quite a lot, quite a few hundred, maybe 500 or 600, 700. I can't remember exactly. I did at the back here a chapter showing a little bit on the probability of these events taking place, and then you've got the way that the person or the incident that takes place, a way that you could express that, and there's probably another maybe 10 ways, or maybe more, or maybe even less, ways that you can describe an event taking place. So it's a matter of taking sort of an average value of how many times it will work and the range of values, and seeing what's the probability of this range of values hitting the same values on this side. So you've got 8 values on this side, and you've got maybe 10 values on this side, and you've got a big range of possible values, and you're going to have to ask yourself, how many times is it going to affect? Now my bit of calculation in this book, and I do a much more extensive calculation in this book, where I devote quite a large chapter at the end on the probability theory of this happening, where you've got 200 odd scientists matching with their invention. And of course the most important part of all that is how frequent you make an error, or how frequently, let's say, that you don't find a connection. Alright? Now, as far as this book's concerned, I wasn't that strict, but I do know it was very, very few times I couldn't find a connection. Sometimes I couldn't make a connection because I I didn't have the full name, and later on I found the full name, and then I could make a connection. With someone like Tolkien, I couldn't make a connection with his name in the books that he wrote until I put the word professor onto his name. So it is not a probability of 1 to find a connection, one connection. And if it's not 1, if you find very few failures, then your probability gets smaller and smaller and smaller every time you find another connection. So it's like tossing a dice. Your probability of getting, oh, let's take a coin. Probably dice is 1/6, but a coin is a half. So I say the average probability is about a third of finding a connection. But let's say it's a half, like a dice. So you can toss a coin up and you'll land on a head or land on a tail, and it's a half, 50-50. So that's fine. One of us say, toss that coin 10 times. What's the probability of you getting a head every single time? That's pretty slim. It will be a half times a half times a half times a half. Is a half to the power of 10. If you were to toss it 200 times, what will be the probability? It's very small. I don't think you'll get it in your calculator, right? It's a very small probability. So if you're talking about the probability of getting a connection between a scientist and his invention to be a third, and out of the 208 scientists I tried, 200 are direct hits, the other 8 are using different gematria systems but still work, but they're not above of the 4 that I've shown in my lectures. I've used, for example, the sum of squares. I've also shown that in the lectures as well, the sum of squares. So I've discounted the sum of squares. I discounted the 2 scientists that were from Israel that used Hebrew. I didn't put that into the probability. So I've got 200 out of 208 hits. So the probability is extremely slim, and hence I call this book Beyond Science, a Mathematical Proof of the Existence of God. Some sort of force or consciousness or controlling guidance there is in this universe that gives forth to what happens in a way. So, however, I'm going to discuss about Caroline, because Caroline committed suicide, and that's a different scenario. Do we have free choice? Is that something which is destined from heaven, that God knows that's going to happen, and therefore that's what you're going to do? Or is this a choice that is put before us? So we've got many different numbers that are connected to one name, and therefore it's not in stone the date at which we die. It's a date that comes around which becomes a possibility and a choice. Perhaps before we're born we actually know we're going to go through that conflict, and then we have a choice at that time. Do we do it or don't we? That's the choice. Alright? Caroline chose the choice in her distress, and we can all appreciate what she went through to take her own life, and I wish the family sympathy for what they've had to go through. And I'm sure Caroline is now in a better world, and she's going to be back again. So let's just see her connection now to the date. So I'm going to rub this off, and so the form I'm going to take is the full value of this second one I was showing before. I'm going to use, I'm going to put it down here so I don't make a mistake. I'm going to use the the date, the 15th of February. I'll write that in short, and it will be 2000 in full, 2020. And if you work out the placement value of all that, you'll get 529. You can work that out yourself. The 15th of February 2020, February spelled fully, you get 529. Now I tried only a few. You can see on the piece of paper, I didn't exactly go to town. Was it this one? No, it's this one. I didn't go to town and spending time finding all different variations. I think there's about 3 different variations that I found I was trying with Caroline. So I've got finally, and I do know one thing, that whenever I do this, quite a few of the facts of the death do come in to the equation, as to how a person died, maybe where they died. So in her case, Caroline Louise, that's her middle name, Flack, committed suicide looking at the wrong thing, committed suicide aged 40 today. And today very often comes, most often that word comes into my connections in these things. I could miss it out. It usually comes in, and if I work that one out, it equals the same as the date at which it occurred. Now usually I find it works with the present tense, not the past tense, but in this case, because to me this wasn't something which was destined. It wasn't something that if I said she commits suicide age, well, that would be like it was already destined to happen. She committed suicide in retrospect. That's what she chose to do, and that's what happened. So that's how it's come out here, and that's the one I chose in the first time round. I tried commits afterwards, but I did this one first, and this is what came out pretty quickly after I think 2 or 3 different variations of what I was doing. Sometimes I didn't put the age in. I tried it with the flat because she committed herself in a flat. So that's what happened, that's what came out, and there is this connection. You can ask yourself, well, what's the probability of finding such a connection? The fact that I can find many of these connections makes it even less likely. Now, just to add a little bit onto this story, and I could go into this in more depth, but I haven't chosen to go forward more than this because one can spend a lot of time on this sort of thing. But I decided to connect her name to what she was doing, rather like I was doing the scientist. And the last thing she was involved with many different things she had done in her life, was she was a presenter of excuse me, of Love Island, and that's what led to her suicide at the end of the day, of her leaving that and her lack of feeling of purpose and meaning in her life. So we'll look at Love Island. And that has the large value. I don't know why I'm looking at this sheet. This is the second sheet I was working on. You can see it doesn't take more than a sheet to work these things out. And I've got a book here, gives me everything. So Love Island has a large value of 772. That's an LV large value. Right, Love Island 772. Her name Caroline has a normal value of 248, that's the decimal value, And the normal inner value, if you remember, I take, is similar to the large value, but let's take R is 90 in the normal value, and I take the word 90, which is 87, O is 60, the word 60 is 97. I'm going to put on my website, actually, I'm going to put a free download for people who want to take just load down all these different tables of values and have them in front of them, rather like I did have a few sheets, but not at hand at the moment, so that you know the value. So the normal inner value is 524 NIV, and if I add that together, you can see I'm going to get 772. So there's a direct correspondence between her name. Well, not so direct, because actually I used two different values than what's there. There might be something, sometimes I find two connections with the name, which is maybe worth looking into a bit more. But there's a connection between her name and the thing she was into. Of course, the question arises, well, my name's Caroline, no, not my name, but many hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people in the world are called Caroline, and they're not all presenters of Love Island. Well, I'd like you to put a comment if you do have a name called Caroline, and let me know whether you really like Love Island, and that you feel connected to that. So that would be really interesting to know, because I haven't been able to do that sort of research if your name is Caroline. But your name is worth all sorts of things. There might be some other people with a different name that is also worth 720 to 772, or to another value of Love Island, and therefore have an affinity to that program as well, because they have a different numerical connection to it. So there we have it. That is Love Island, and that is Caroline Louise Flack, who is much missed now. So just finish up with mentioning about the other two books which I've recently put into print. I mentioned I will do this in my last lecture. This book is called Elisha and the Two She-Bears. This book is particularly of interest to me because I started looking at YouTube and various essays that people have written about this story in chapter 2 of Kings 2, towards the end of chapter 2, which is about Elisha, and there's 3 verses of it, where he's going up to Mount Carmel. He's left the village. I think he left Jericho at that time, and he's going up, and people, or kids, come out of the village, and they start jeering at him and saying, "Go up, Baldy, go up, Baldy." And he turns around and curses them in the name of God, and 2 she-bears come out, and it says they tear up 42 of the kids. Quite a bunch of kids that must have come out. And there's all sorts of YouTube videos on it, and they all sort of bring down the Bible, saying how cruel, this is a prophet of God. What was he doing? He's cursed them. Put the prophet aside. It was God that actually fulfilled the prophet's curse. So God sends out these 2 bears and kills these 42 kids. It doesn't sound a very good thing to happen. It doesn't ring a bell that this loving God of ours would do such a thing. And why would such a high righteous prophet, who done good things to other people, he helps a widow, he brings back to life a child, and he helps the town get pure water, does a lot of good things, and then suddenly we find him doing this this very cruel thing to bring up these bears. But I show that this story is far, far different than the way most people look at it. There's a lot more behind the story, and it's not really telling you a story about 2 bears coming out killing kids. So this book is quite deep. I might give a lecture just on an aspect of this book coming up soon. And the other book which I've got is called, is this one here. This is called The Magic of the Circle. I don't know what I write sometimes. So The Magic of the Circle is a very deep book. It goes into different things that are circular shape. It goes into the significance of the circle, the connection to the Sabbath, and it's this is quite a deep book. I'll just give you a little interesting taste of this book. One of the things that connect to the number to the circle is the sabbatical year, because it goes well, the Jubilee year. Sabbatical year is every 7 years, but in the Bible there are 7 sabbatical years, and after that you've got the 50th year, which is the Jubilee year. Just briefly, I'll explain to you something interesting about that. Well, I've given a lecture already on the circle. If you look back, I can't remember exactly which number it is, maybe 8 or 9 or something like that, or 7. But the word circle has a placement value of 50. So every 50 years there's this Jubilee year. Okay? In the Jubilee year, the people who were slaves, I don't like the word slaves, but because slavery has this connotation of being forced work and whipped and things like that, but the Torah forbids that sort of behaviour with a slave. You have to look after them like a servant. Has to be respected and even eat at the owner's table. So the circle has a placement value of 50. The word 50 equals 66. Now, the slave went free, so it was a period of freedom, and the word freedom equals 66. Also placement value. So the Hebrew for freedom and liberation is called dror in Hebrew, and that is spelled, let me use a different colour, dror. So it was a Shana Dror, it was a year of liberation, where land went back to its original owner, where slaves went free back to their families. And the word Dror in placement value, sorry, I'm not reading it right, Dror, so Resh. So we've got Dalad, Resh, Vav, Resh. That's the 20th letter, 6th letter, 20th letter, and 4th letter. That's also 50. Now, interestingly, there is a connection which I go in more detail in my book with this number 66 and the circle. We have this connection of 12 with the circle. You've got 12 numbers going around your clock. There were 12 tribes around the mountain in the wilderness, and the book talks about that as well. So, how am I going to do this? So I'm going to have this off. So remember that 50 equals 66, but if you take a circle and you were to make what is called a mystic rose, where you take your circle and you divide it up into the clock face. So you've got 1 to 12 going around, and then you join up every dot to every other. Something which kids do a lot. Good way of doodling, right? So that will go to everyone there, and that will be 11 lines. You've got 11 lines there, and then you start from this one. You do the same thing. I might use another colour, and you'll get. Okay, so you join those all up. Everything is interconnected with everything. This is what a mystic road is all about. You can't go to that. So now you've got 10. And then if you do yet another one, you'll only have 9, because you've only got 9 lines left to do from there. And you go down all the way until, so you get 9, and you go down to 1. So what you're going to do is you're going to add all those numbers up. It's called triangle 11. I write it like that, triangle 11, where you add up 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 all the way up to 11, and you will get the magic number of 66. So we see this interrelation between a circle, freedom, it's the value of 50, which is 66, and the clock face, which is connected to 12, and 12 of course is connected to many things in the Bible. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a like, and do visit my website. My website will be down in the description, and any questions you have, please write to me. You can write to me on my website as well if you've got questions, or you can email me if you want a more longer answers. I can write easier, or I can send you free articles and samples of my book. Again, I'm going to try and put samples of my books into my free samples in my website. So look for those in a little while. Right, have a good day, and we'll do lecture 25 hopefully by next week.